Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the really fascinating evolution of treatments for amblyopia, which you probably know better as lazy eye. For decades, the standard approach to treating this pediatric vision disorder felt pretty much set in stone. But as we're going to see today, modern clinical research has completely flipped those traditional assumptions upside down. It's usually the very first question anxious parents ask. Does fixing my child's lazy eye mean they literally have to wear a patch all day, every day? Honestly, it's a really daunting prospect. But I'm going to show you how rigorous, large-scale clinical trials have completely disrupted those old-school expectations. We're going to look at exactly what the science actually says about getting the best visual outcomes with the absolute least amount of disruption to a kid's life. Okay, so let's set the baseline by defining exactly what amblyopia is. Put simply, it's a visual disorder that results in reduced vision in one eye. Now, the eye itself might look perfectly physically healthy, but the brain, it basically just starts ignoring the visual input from it. A super common cause of this, and a big focus of the clinical data we're looking at today, is strabismic amblyopia, which is where the eyes are misaligned. When the eyes don't point in the exact same direction, the brain just can't merge the two images, so it compensates by tuning out the weaker eye entirely. While we hear a lot about strabismic amblyopia, the clinical literature actually outlines four distinct types. Aside from strabismic, you have stimulus deprivation, which is caused by a physical obstacle in the visual pathway, like a cataract. Then there's anisometropic amblyopia. That's when there's a huge difference in the focusing error between the two eyes. And finally, ametropic amblyopia, involving a significant refractive error in both eyes. But honestly, no matter the type, they all present really unique, frustrating roadblocks to developing healthy binocular vision. So here is our roadmap for today. First, defining amblyopia. Second, the patching problem. Third, optimizing the dosage. Fourth, atropine drops versus patching. Fifth, testing high-tech solutions. And finally, long-term treatment success. Let's start with Section 1, defining amblyopia, the clinical data. If we truly want to understand which treatments are best, we can't just rely on clinical anecdotes or, what we've always done. We have to look at the most rigorous, high-quality data available. This flow diagram beautifully illustrates that intense process. Researchers started by identifying 276 medical records and studies on amblyopia treatments. But through a really strict filtering process, removing duplicates, checking eligibility, tossing out flawed data, they narrowed the whole thing down to just 3 highly reliable studies. They literally sifted through all the noise to find the absolute truth. And check out the overwhelming amount of green across this bias assessment chart for those final studies. Whether we're talking about random sequence generation, blinding, or selective reporting, the risk of bias is universally low. That's what all that solid green means. For parents and doctors, this is a real game changer. It means we can genuinely trust these findings when making major treatment decisions. Moving on to Section 2, the patching problem, the traditional gauntlet. So what exactly were doctors prescribing all those decades? Well, historically, the gold standard was total occlusion therapy, which we all know as the dreaded eye patch. But let's be real, total occlusion is famously brutal for kids, and the side effects are completely valid. Clinical reviews point out a few big ones. First, you've got the psychological effects of wearing a highly visible patch, which often leads to self-consciousness or even bullying. Second, physical discomfort. Things like severe skin allergies and irritation from the constant adhesive. But the absolute most serious risk, intractable diplopia. That's a clinical term for permanent double vision, caused by the complete loss of suppression from being way too aggressive with a patch. So yeah, the stakes are definitely high. Which brings us to Section 3, optimizing the dosage. Less is more. Because of those awful adverse effects, the medical community entered what we call the dosage debate. Like, how much patching is actually necessary? This sparked the landmark amblyopia treatment studies, or ATS. Let's look at ATS trial number 2. Researchers took kids aged 3 to 7 with moderate amblyopia and put 2 hours of daily patching up against 6 hours. For years, the assumption was always more is better. But the data? It proved that just 2 hours of patching is actually just as effective as 6 hours for moderate cases. The visual acuity improved substantially for both, with absolutely no clinical difference between the groups. Think about the massive relief for a family who no longer has to enforce a strict 6-hour patching rule. And the study went even further, looking at severe amblyopia. They compared 6 hours of daily patching against an incredibly difficult, honestly almost punishing full-time patching routine. The result? Over 4 months, vision improved substantially in both groups. And once again, no difference in the outcome. 6 hours achieved the exact same substantial improvement as patching full-time. So less really is more. Now for Section 4, atropine drops versus patching. What if you could just ditch the physical patch altogether? That's where pharmacological interventions come in, specifically using eye drops to temporarily blur the vision in the strong eye. The ATS-1 trial compared 1 drop a day of atropine against a minimum of 6 hours of daily patching, and the data here is super interesting. The study found that while the patching group saw slightly faster initial improvement, if you fast forward to the 6-month mark, the difference in visual acuity between the two groups was clinically insignificant. Both saw significant improvement, so atropine drops proved to be a highly viable, totally patch-free alternative. Section 5. Testing high-tech solutions. The digital letdown. We live in a digital age, right? So naturally, researchers tried to find high-tech solutions to outsmart a simple cloth patch. But let's look closely at the results from the ATS-18 and ATS-20 trials. They tested a special binocular iPad game against standard treatments. Now, at week 4, the youngest kids, the 4 to 6-year-olds, did actually show some improved visual acuity. But look at the long-term columns. By week 8, and definitely by week 16, the digital iPad games just fell flat. There was no significant difference compared to wearing glasses alone. And when pitted directly against the patch, standard old-school patching remained the clearly superior option. Turns out, the digital revolution hasn't quite beaten the patch just yet. And our final section, Section 6, long-term treatment success, the 15-year view. Knowing how to treat amblyopia is one thing, but making sure those results last a lifetime is the real goal. I want to draw your attention to this number, 25%. The data shows that roughly 25% of successfully treated kids actually experience a recurrence of the condition in the first year after stopping treatment. It's a real, scary risk. However, the data also gave us a brilliant fix: tapering. If a child was patching for 6 hours a day, tapering that dosage down to 2 hours a day before quitting completely significantly drops that risk of recurrence. You don't just stop cold turkey. And if we look even further down the road, we have crucial studies like this one from the National Institutes of Health. They've been tracking patients who were enrolled in amblyopia trials before they were 7, following them all the way up to 15 years of age. These massive ongoing follow-ups are confirming the incredible long-term durability of these treatments. When done right, following the optimized dosages we just went through, the improved vision really does last straight into adulthood. It's been a pretty fascinating journey, hasn't it? From the dark days of blind, full-time patching all the way to carefully optimized 2-hour doses and daily eye drops. But I think it leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on. If a high-tech, custom-designed iPad game still can't beat a simple piece of cloth over the eye, what does that actually tell us about the future of pediatric treatments? Sometimes the simplest solutions, backed by the most rigorous clinical data, truly remain the most powerful. Thank you so much for exploring the science with us today on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and as always, keep following the data.